Hi, I'm Kai, and welcome to Expanded Foliage Brushes 2. Why 2? Well, because this version is substantially different to the previous one, and I'm sure there's going to be some people who prefer the old one, so I'll just use both. There'll be 2 mod pages, one for each mod. Now before we get into the mod proper, there's a couple of issues with brushes in this game that I really need to address. First of all, forest brushes leave this nasty ground texture on most maps. It doesn't look very nice, but it's sort of forced into this brush. Now there is a way to get rid of it, and that is to treat the forest as a shrub brush, so as a bush brush. See, that comes without the texture, but it comes with a downside. That being, a forest brush builds up from grasses to shrubs to forest as you paint. So it's sort of smooth, you only get trees in the middle. But if you treat it as a shrub brush, the trees will be painted with the smaller foliage, like so, which isn't nearly as smooth looking. And the next issue is one of performance. So, grasses in this game do not want to be indexed. The game lags quite a bit while trying to index them. What do I mean by that? Well, grasses are these tiny little bits of stuff here. There is 2 ways I could have made this mod. One way is to make all brushes use the same grass, so whether it's tropical, whether it's temperate, whether it's taiga, they would all use the default brush on that map. And the second way to make this mod is to have custom grasses for each brush, but this causes a bit of jittering when you paint. Now it wasn't very noticeable there, but if I increase the radius and move fast across the screen, you'll see it's lagging quite a bit, and it lags more the longer you hold the brush down. And this is caused exclusively by trying to paint different colored grasses on the same map. And I couldn't really decide how to tackle these problems, so I've included options for both of them in the config file. That is, you can set all the forest in this game to be treated as shrubs if you want to. They're treated as forest to begin with, and that will get rid of the texture, but it will make them spawn weird. And 2, if you're not super fussed about the grass color, you can also disable this in the config file, and then every brush will use the map's default grass. And that will stop the jittering. And just to be clear, this isn't about the tall grass, that's fine, it's just about this very low grass at the bottom here. Cool, so with that, let's get into the mod. So first of all, because there's already way too many brushes, the Paleo brushes are unchanged. These are basically the same brushes as they are on each map. Now each map has slight differences, they'll have different grasses, different bushes, that kind of stuff. And these will just use the default settings from that map. Because again, there's way too many brushes already. And below those, you have the delete tool. That works exactly like it did before. And with that, we can move on to the actual additions of this mod. First of all, tropical brushes. And the first brush we have is the Heavy Forest Fool. This is basically as close to the vanilla jungle as we can get. Now a couple of things about it. First of all, you can see it's a bit flatter. And that's because in vanilla, there's a big hill in the middle that raises the trees. And there aren't actually trees in the middle in vanilla. What you get instead are these little hats. So these little pretend trees that go in the middle to make it look bigger than it is. And because I had to remove the hill from the middle for some other brushes I added later on, I figured I might as well fill the forest out, so it is a proper full forest now you can go inside. It's not missing anything, except it is extremely bushy. So bushy in fact that you can't see inside, and that is exactly why I've added this second variant, the Heavy Forest Bushless. It's identical, so you can even paint it over the original, you won't see any difference, except it has no bushes. And I don't actually hate how it looks. It is still full of elephant grass, so it is pretty thick, but you can see through it. And then the final variety of vanilla jungles, the Heavy Forest Open. It is identical to the previous one, but it's missing even the elephant grass. So it's just regular grass and some ground cover. And again, I don't hate it, I think it fits quite well in a beachside biome. But of course, there is an issue with it. And that is an issue that applies to all vanilla jungles. And that is, jungles don't have grass. They have heavy ground cover, but they don't have this kind of heavy grass because the canopy blocks light, so it cannot grow. Well, that's what these 2 here tackle. And these 2 brushes are the Realistic Jungle Verdant and Open variants. So, starting off with the Verdant version, this is basically the same template as the vanilla jungle, but I've removed all the grass and replaced it with proper ground coverage. So you have flowers, you have palm trees, you have ferns, including these new ferns I've added that fit in a little bit better than the vanilla ferns. And here's a pretty good example. So vanilla ferns are more yellow in color and a bit more dried looking, but I think these fit a lot better in this sort of biome. And of course you have fallen logs every now and again. And dropping in here, I do think this looks a lot more realistic. Look at this. It's still not perfect, but I think it's a lot closer to a real jungle. There are still heavy bushes, but they're not completely blocking your view. And the ground still feels covered, but it's not covered by grass, there are open patches. And I think this is best highlighted by dropping a couple of dinosaurs in, so let's do that. Drop these dudes and some dryos. And have a look at that. Now one issue you would have noticed is everything looks a bit flat in here, and that's because there is no directional light. Sunlight is being blocked by the canopy and not going into the jungle. That's not my choice, that's just sort of how the game handles these trees. But I think it's worth it, I think it still looks pretty good, and you can of course add gaps in the canopy to make up for this. And the second variant is pretty much the same thing, but without the big bushes and the small bushes. So this brush here adds these big mango trees and these bushes on the floor. Whereas this second variant is just a little bit more open and, well, I say a little bit more open, it looks drastically more open when you look at it, doesn't it? It is a pretty stark difference. And it's one I kind of like. I do prefer the bushier version, but this one is here if you want it. And of course, you can mix and match between the two. So you can sort of semi-fill this with some bushes, but not completely fill it. It's all about choice. Now, of course, these are still quite open, both the verdant and the open variety, so I would suggest putting them on hills, building hills around them, little valleys, just to block your sight a little bit when you move around in them. See if we add some hills on either side, and a little bit of hill in the middle. That, I think, looks way better already. See, this looks a lot more busy now. Next, something a little bit easier. Palm trees. These are identical to vanilla palm trees. You get bushes, you get short palm trees, tall palm trees, and these little cabbage palms here. And of course the tall grass. And then we get another new thing, that being the mango grove. And this is sort of what it looks like. And I am quite happy with how this turned out. It's basically the same thing as these palm trees, but instead of the tall palms, we have mango trees. And they're a bit further spread out. So again, banana palms, cabbage palms, these bushes, and tall grass, and of course, mango trees. Now it's not so busy that you can't see what's going on, but it is busy enough to block your line of sight, at least at a distance, and I think it's a very nice effect. If we add some dinosaurs, you can really see how they feel here. And of course they've walked right into the trees, but you get the idea. If I go into first person mode, next, another new thing, palm shrubs. These are basically the ground cover from these two brushes, but without anything tall. And I think these are perfect for beachside areas, just like that big open brush from earlier. And next we have a fern grove, because I do love a good fern in my life. And this is pretty much what you'd expect. It's the Biosyn ferns and then the custom ferns I made with slightly darker leaves. Now there is no grass because I couldn't decide whether I wanted or not. I might add it in the end, I might add an option, or I might just leave it as it is. And this, I think, is ideal for some smaller dinosaurs. If we add some homalos, wherever they are. There we go. They can just sort of get lost in it. But of course, it's a pretty fitting vibe for any dinosaur. And then another vanilla brush, the verdant shrubs. I've renamed it, but this is basically just a vanilla brush. It's low foliage with some flowers, and grass of course. Next up we have ground cover. So this is the ground cover from, I believe, these brushes here. It is not, I lied. So the verdant shrubs are the second lowest vanilla shrub on each map, and ground cover is the lowest vanilla brush on each map. Next, very long grass. Elephant grass, in fact. It looks a bit weird at a distance, but that's because that's just how it works. Close up though, it looks pretty cool. And this is mostly because I saw a lot of people using these in expanded scenery, just placing down elephant grass after elephant grass. So I thought I'd just make a brush to make that job a little bit easier. You can of course make it quite thin, and line rivers with it if you want. And finally, long grass. This is pretty much what you'd expect. It's just the longest grass from this biome. Now as you saw, it looks a bit weird from a distance, but close up, it looks pretty cool. This is sort of the height you can expect it to be. We're using a dryer for scale. Alright, that's one biome down. Let's move on, because there's quite a few things left. So moving on, temperate biome. And first we have two alternatives of the same thing. And we have quite a few of those in this biome. So first up we have the summer heavy forest. And this is what it looks like. It's the summer version of the temperate forest. It's quite thick, because again I removed the hill from the center and just filled it out with foliage. So you have foliage all the way through, and you can go all the way through. And actually, even though it looks quite dense when you fly through it, it's quite manageable in first person mode. It's still very thick, but you can sort of get around. And this, I don't know, I love this. I love how this looks. Of course, I'm tooting my own horn here, but yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. And of course, thanks to Pennsylvania, we have the autumnal version of this. So, same thing, but autumn trees. They replace the normal trees, so you don't have to worry about sort of rearranging things. They'll just go in the same spot, but change their color. And because the saplings are so visible, I'd say this looks even better in first person mode than the first one. Look at that. You can just see little trees occasionally. Next we have open variants of that. So we have an open summer forest and an open autumnal forest, which are the same stuff but without bushes. If we go into first person mode, you can see that they are completely see-through. Or rather, you can see all the way through them. And it is quite a nice effect. I do think they're a little bit too open, but of course these brushes are designed to be mixed, so you can sort of mix in a little bit of heavy foliage in the middle, and just slightly clutter it up, or slightly open it up. And as I showed before, you can sort of mix and match them, so you can mix and match a heavy forest that's completely full of bushes with an open autumnal forest, and it will just work. They'll replace their positions and open it up a little bit. Next, something a little bit simpler, woodland. This is just the vanilla woodland brush. So it has the temperate grasses, temperate nettles, and all that good stuff, the flowers, and small redwood trees. And then we go back into seasonal stuff, so we have 4 different sapling brushes. Let's just cover them real quick. So we have thick summer saplings and thick autumn saplings, and then of course, the open varieties of both. Just like with the big trees. And looking into them, you'll see why these are some of my favorite brushes. This is just, I don't know, it's so tranquil, it's so nice looking. And the difference is, as you'd expect, there is the summer variants of trees down here, and autumn variants here, and then up top we have big bushes, and down below we have no bushes, pretty much only trees. And of course some grasses, some nettles, some ground cover, but not these big bushes we get in these top brushes up here. So again, all about choice, and just like before, you can mix and match them. So we can add a few more bushes to this brush here. We can take away some bushes from this brush here. We can add some regular trees here. We can add some autumnal trees and some bushes here. Again, it's all about mixing and matching. And then, when you're least expecting it, the Fern Grove strikes back. And this uses the temperate version of low ferns and the vanilla version of tall ferns. So again, it's a little bit more dry looking. And this version does have low grasses, but very, very low grasses. I did remove the sort of regular grass that comes with these brushes and just made a very, very short variant. So it doesn't get in the way of the ferns, but it does add some life to it. And side by side with the other ferns, this is kind of how they look. This is how they differ. So again, a lot more wet, a lot more green, versus a bit more temperate, a little bit more dry. Next we have the forest floor. So this is literally just the ground cover from these forests up here. This is kind of what it looks like. You get nettles, you get ferns, you get tall grasses, and I think some flowers, yeah, and you get some flowers here too. And of course, a lot of bushes. Next up you get verdant shrubs, so these are again vanilla shrubs. This is just the vanilla verdant shrub brush, renamed so it doesn't conflict with these here. And it is exactly like in vanilla. You have tall grasses, you have bushes, and you have a shitload of flowers. And it is quite beautiful, it's very tranquil. Next we have ground cover. So this is similar to that here, but it's a bit more thick. You get less flowers and a lot more tall grass. And again, ground cover is just the lowest vanilla brush. And finally, long grass. So again, this is just a set of the longest grasses from this biome. And it looks like so. It's extremely similar to this here, but missing the nettles and flowers. And I think it looks particularly nice in first person mode. Honestly, I think the temperate biome in general looks really nice in first person mode. If we go into these little sapling forests here, look at that. And with that, we can finally move on to the Taiga brush. This is pretty much vanilla. It's the big forest here, and this is the exact same forest you get in vanilla, of course minus the elevation in the middle. And yes, you can go into the forest. You can go in first person mode as well. You can't drop in for some reason, but you can run into it. But one thing you will have noticed about Taiga is you get a lot of dry trees on the outside, but you don't really get them on the inside. So I added a second variant of the forest which fills it with all varieties of trees. So now all trees can spawn everywhere in the forest, and it's just a nice little difference if you want to do that. Next we have redwoods. And this is a completely vanilla brush, so nothing changed, same taiga grass, same taiga trees, little low foliage, same stuff you'd expect. Next we have the forest outskirts, which are very similar to that, except they have very few tall trees. They only have these tall dry trees, and then a bunch of saplings. So they look a little bit like the outskirts of a taiga forest. And then we're back to the vanilla verdant shrubs, which look, as you'd expect, red flowers, white flowers, tall grass, bushes, that sort of thing. And then the ground cover, which is the lowest vanilla ground cover. Again, bushes, flowers, pretty much what you get in vanilla. And then finally, long grass, which is just a collection of the longest grasses from this biome, of which there aren't too many. It's pretty much just tufts of grey or brownish grass. It is quite nice looking, but it's not too varied. This is sort of the difference between that and the normal grass. This is normal, this is long. So it's pretty much just these tufts that make it different. And the next biome is quite interesting because it is the alpine biome. It's identical to this one, but with slightly different grasses. For example, if I were to replace the regular long grass with this long grass, you can see that it's a little bit greener. And this is sort of the only difference. The grass is just a bit greener. Now they used to have different flowers as well. I believe the alpine biome's flowers were yellow, and the taiga biome's flowers were red, and they're not anymore. They're both red now. I'm not sure why, I don't know who changed this, but I've uninstalled the mod, and it's still the same. Of course you have to test it on different maps, but it is pretty much the same thing. Oh well, I guess Taiga has slightly more flowers, so that's a difference. So yeah, that's pretty much the only thing that separates Taiga from Alpine. It's just slightly more flowers than this one, and this one's a bit greener. That is it. But I figured with a mod like this, it would be silly not to include it just for the choice of grass. So there you go. And with that we can finally move on to something that looks a little bit different. The desert brushes. First off, vanilla desert canopy. This is what it looks like. You've seen it before. Short dry grass, desert bushes, cacti, vanilla stuff. Next up, desert palms. Again, vanilla stuff. You get palm trees in the desert. And then something a little bit different. So I saw these yucca trees in the desert biome and I figured, why not make them their own brush? And so I did. That's what this is. It's the yucca trees brush. It's pretty much identical to the desert brush, but instead of cacti, you have only yucca trees. Next we have the verdant shrubs. So again, vanilla brush, just vanilla shrubs. Next we have the ground cover brush, which again is the smallest vanilla brush from this biome, and it looks like this. So a couple of cacti, some of these plants, and some shrubs. And then finally, the quote-unquote desert long grass, which is, surprisingly, very, very short. But it is the longest grass from this biome, so that's all you get in here. Next biome is Biosyn. This is very similar to the Taiga biome, and so the Alpine biome as well, but it is a lot more green. It's a bit more mossy looking. So again, I removed the barrier in the middle, so it's now flat, and you can go inside. Likewise, I filled the inside out, so it is completely full of ferns and other small bits and pieces that you'd want to see if you actually go in here. But other than that, it is just the vanilla brush. Next we move on to the Biosyn version of redwoods, which looks like so. This is, I believe, the exact same redwood trees, but with the Biosyn ground cover. And of course Biosyn grass, which is green. Kinda see how it blends in, it's quite nice. And just like with Taiga and Alpine, we have a forest outskirts brush, which does the same thing here. Same ground cover, except small trees and dead trees. But then we have two brand new brushes. We have the drywoods and deadwoods. Now drywoods act as the base of these two brushes. It's pretty much just dry and dead woods with some bushes and dead grass at the bottom. And then deadwoods is just an alternative without the bushes, so it looks like so. But honestly, even though the only difference is this brush here lacks bushes, I feel like they feel completely different. Like, look at this. This feels dry and dying, sure, but feels like there could still be life here. Whereas this just feels completely desolate. Next we get some more verdant shrubs, which again, this is just the bush brush from Vanilla Jurassic World Evolution 2. Then we get ground cover, which again, this is just the smallest brush from this set. And it's very ferny, so again, I love it. And finally, long Biosyn grass, which this time around is just regular grass because Biosyn has no taller grasses than this. And then we can move on to the final biome, which is Malta. Now, as I mentioned earlier, forest brushes come with a green texture on some maps, which I don't think looks very nice here. I mean, it is a vibe, but it's not the Malta vibe. which is exactly why I've included a second variety of forest here. It's pretty much identical, but it's considered a shrub, not a forest, so it doesn't come with a nasty texture. But of course, there is a downside. Whenever you build a forest, it builds out in layers. We have the shrub layer and then the forest layer. But if you just have it treated as a shrub, trees will be built out on the outskirts as well, which I don't think looks quite as nice. But the option is there. So even though we get a config option to set whether forests are being treated as forests or as shrubs, I figured this green texture is so un-Malta-like, I'll just include 2 variants regardless of how you set the others. Makes sense? Good. Moving on, we just have the 3 vanilla Malta shrubs. There isn't too much difference between them, but I think these here have flowers. This one here has the aloe plant, I believe. Yeah, over there. And this one here has cacti. And then, finally, we have the long grass from Malta, which is just the same as desert grass. And that finally covers everything. There's a lot of stuff in this mod. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoy the mod when it's out. And I'll see you around.